The story starts with a somber scene, depicting a doctor who asked a man named T-sung how he was feeling for the day. It was the same question every day. The man answered that his legs hurt. This has been his usual response. His doctor recommended increasing the dosage of his meds. T-sung lost interest in finding where things went wrong. After the consultation with the doctor, a nurse guided him to his room. He clearly remembered that when he woke up, everything was already over. T-sung was half paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. On the way to his room, he did not miss the sympathetic gazes of other people. In his mind, this was the only thing he had. Also, the unfortunate truth of being half paralyzed. This was our MC, a kid named T-sung. T-sung's paralysis was a result of a car accident caused by drunk driving. He had just gone to a convenience store to pick up some beers and snacks, but he was suddenly blinded by the lights coming from a fast-approaching car. Our MC was stunned and was thrown into the air. The next thing he knew, he was in a hospital. The nurse helped T-sung to his bed where he continued to lament. He was left with an illusionary pain in his legs, as if they were being cut off. The only thing our MC could depend on right now was the medications that were given to him. He remembered the saying that God only gives us trials we can endure. But in his mind, he would have just rather died. There was nothing much T-sung could do in his confinement. The most he could do was read novels. In a dimly lit room, he read a novel titled Magician Who Dominates the World on his phone. He feels comfort whenever he reads a novel with a happy ending. T-sung was almost finished with the novel. He was sure he would be able to finish it that night. The novel ended with a magician named Aiden destroying the old world and creating a new world to his taste. The new world consists of people who have lost their memory and now live a happy life, even those with traumatic deaths. T-sung finished the novel and felt terrible, as the novel he had chosen to read also had a bad ending. Our emotional MC cried, questioning why he can't just be happy. He then stopped himself from feeling bad about the novel. He was reminded that something like a happy ending will never be achievable for him. T-sung then went to sleep after yet another disappointing day. But then a bright light appeared all of a sudden. This notification appeared. T-sung abruptly woke up. He thought that he was just having hallucinations. But he was no longer in his hospital room. He's in a medieval-looking room with wooden fixtures. He figured he was dreaming and looked for his phone. And as he tried to stand up, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the basin of water beside his bed, and was shocked when he saw someone else's face. The realization that he possesses a different body came soon after to him. A mysterious message appeared before T-sung. He looked closely at the screen. It stated that he was in the world of Magician Who Dominates the World, and that he must live as the character Mord Vernars. T-sung realized that it was the novel that he was reading the previous night. Mord Vernard was an extra in the novel. Another message then appeared that said, if Mord dies, he would die too. As the realization settled in, T-sung began to take stock of his new environment. This new identity has also given him the ability to stand on his feet again. After that, the notifications appeared again. The system has given him all of Mord's memories. Even the language inside this world was registered. This gave him a bit of a headache, and after a few more seconds, he was able to tap into Mord's memories. Everything was flowing into his mind. He saw how this character lived his life, and how it ended inside the novel. Mord Vernars is a son of the Archduke Vernars family. He was an illegitimate son of the Vernars family's patriarch. This character was too powerful. Even if the whole team of the protagonists was about to fight him head-on, no one could guarantee that they could win. Mord was just defeated because the protagonist ambushed him while he was undergoing a ritual to gain control of his psyche. This sudden death proved that he was just an extra inside this novel. T-sung wondered why he had become Mord. Another message appeared that said he must change the fate of destruction of this world, and if he was successful, his wish would be granted. Our MC stared at this message for a while. He then figured that the system wanted him to protect the world, in place of the protagonist who destroys the world in the end. T-sung then cleared his thoughts for a bit to analyze everything. This scenario right now could only be a dream, because he was already tired of living his normal life. But this guy didn't really care about it too much, as he no longer had the desire to live his life of being half paralyzed. If this was really a dream, he wouldn't want to wake up anymore. He no longer cared if this was God's prank or something. And if he could really change the fate of this world, the wish he wanted to be granted was to be able to get his body back from before the accident. This was his ultimate mission right now. Taesung has all the information about this novel called Magician Who Dominates the World. On top of that, he reincarnated as one of the most powerful characters inside this novel. Our MC was now determined to do his best with this chance that he got. Taesung, a half-paralyzed kid, was now ready to live his life as Mord. Mord Vernars is an illegitimate child of the Archduke Vernars family. He was also unaware about the identity of his mother. This led him to live a difficult life. Having his mother died a few days after he was born, Mord was called the child who killed his own mother. All the children who grew up alongside Mord bullied him because of this incident. But Mord had a turning point in his life. Those of the Vernars bloodline awakened powers when they turned 15. They called it New Blood Awakening. They had to endure pain as if their entire body was burning in flames. But after that, they were gifted with immense powers. For someone outside of the Archduke family, the chances of surviving the New Blood Awakening are less than 1 in 5. Nonetheless, Mord survived and obtained immense powers. Mord's mother left a letter that read, if he survives his 15th birthday, he should head to the Archduke Vernars family. And he did just that. He went to the Vernars residence. He agreed to take a test in order to be acknowledged by his father. Taesung, having Mord's memories, figured that the timeline he must be in was after Mord arrived at the Archduke Vernars family residence for the test. He recalled that Archduke Vernars is one of the main antagonists of the novel. This family already has a lot of children with direct bloodlines, so it was unlikely for Mord to be accepted. The Archduke took advantage of Mord's desire to be acknowledged as his son, so he raised Mord to be his hunting dog. And according to the novel, no one really managed to find out how strong Mord actually was. His strength was nearly immeasurable. As a reader of this novel, our MC would also want to know more about Mord's powers and abilities. And while he was busy with his thoughts, someone called his attention. This man was the one who was about to oversee his examination. Todd was a huge man with a strong build like an instructor should be. Taesung went near this man and found out that he was still bigger than him. From the way Mord talked to him, Todd knew that something was different. He thought that even the eyes of Mord were different from yesterday. He then reminded him of the test he was going to take. This instructor asked our MC if he already had some experience in fighting. Taesung was a bit flustered with the fact that he already had a fight. He was glad either way, since he wanted to test Mord's powers. Taesung followed Todd to the training area. Todd reminded him to not mention that he was the Archduke's son. This was kind of an unspoken rule for the legitimate children. They were not allowed to let the others know about their identity unless they have already become an official warrior. After some time, they arrived at the training area where a group of men awaited them. Our MC carefully observed the team and realized they wore the same training attire and all looked fit. Taesung assumed that they were warriors as they look a bit too old to be trainees. Todd reminded him that the way a Vernars fight is different from the way an ordinary warrior fights. Taesung knew that and continued by saying that real Vernars use weapons when untrained. But once trained, they only fight with their body. It was already known throughout the content that the Vernars family has the best organization of warriors. And since they were trained with just hand-to-hand combat, they really didn't need any weapons. Our MC recalled that no weapons in this world could overpower the physique of the Vernars. Todd then declared that the test will judge which affiliation Mord will go to and how he shall be trained. He then called on a warrior named Vince who would be Mord's opponent for the test. Vince looked smug as he walked towards Mord. Taesung had a fight with Vince and had to do well, for the results would decide his future as Mord. Vince questioned whether Mord was really 15 given how big he was. He then wondered whose son Mord was, as he tried to provoke him. Taesung looked relieved as he realized that Mord was not the only legitimate child in the Archduke Vernars family. He had no other choice but to take this chance. Our MC knew that he could only achieve freedom in this world with power. Taesung even considered just living a peaceful life somewhere far away in this world. but he had no choice. He was now determined to prove his skills. He immediately advanced to take a punch at Vince. Vince was caught off guard, but he was able to dodge it. He had underestimated Mord, but now he learned that the new guy knew how to fight. In T-san's mind, he was quite happy because his boxing skills that he earned when he was young proved to be useful. Our MC landed multiple hits because his new body was more agile than expected. Vince got to his knees. He admitted that Mord was pretty good at fighting. He then expressed that Mord was not telling the truth when he said he didn't learn how to fight, and that his posture is that of a learned person. T-san then replied that he just copied others. Vince seemed to be threatened by Mord. He immediately advances to him at speed. A bystander warrior was surprised to see Vince using mana. He urged him to stop as Mord was just a kid who hadn't even learned the mana combat technique. Todd, on the other hand, seemed unbothered and told him to let them be. Mord, on the other hand, didn't expect that his opponent would use mana against him. This guy had already charged all the mana on his fist and was about to punch Mord, but his attack was unexpectedly dodged by Mord. Vince was stunned by how the newbie figured out his attack. T-san saw his strike through the mana combat technique. Mord then proceeded to gather mana of his own. He was about to return the favor to Vince. This guy was now confused and scared at the same time, because a newbie like Mord was about to defeat him. Our MC hit Vince with immense power. Blood came out from his mouth. The force was so powerful that it sent him flying. This shocked everyone in the training camp. They never thought that Mord would send an official warrior flying. All of them found out that this guy was too powerful. Our MC then approached Vince. This guy was still out cold from T-san's attack. T-san thought to himself that it would have been bad if he hadn't managed to dodge Vince's last attack, but good thing he was getting used to his power. After a few seconds, Vince moved and he stood up once again. Mord went back to his fighting stance. He thought that warriors were really built differently. Our MC then noticed something. Vince was already at his limit. He was just forcing himself to fight. Meanwhile, the bystanders were wondering how Vince was defeated with just one punch, and where Mord had come from. T-san noticed Vince was not in good condition and asked Todd if that was enough. He then explained that he still did not know how to control his strength and that he might kill him at this rate. In Todd's perspective, he was quite amazed on how things turned out. He was supposed to test out the limits of Mord, but this examination didn't seem to be helpful. Todd seemed to think about it and then agreed to stop the fight. He approached Mord and questioned why he lied about not having learned how to fight. T-san insisted that it was the truth, but Todd did not believe him. He retorted that there was no way he could use mana without having learned it. T-san then told him that he used it for the first time after having a really high fever, but he doesn't know much about it. Todd remained unconvinced. Mord then talked about his experience of the new blood awakening, but the truth was, he was already able to use mana even before he experienced the awakening. That's how talented he was. The god of combat was Vernars, and the goddess of the heavens was Erida. The blood of these two gods exists in Mord's body, creating an incredible synergy, making him a miraculous being. Mord was blessed with his genetics. This guy never even trained until he was 15 years old. In just 7 years, he became stronger than Archduke Vernars, who was known to be the strongest of the successors of the god of combat. This is how terrifying Mord's power was. And this was according to the story. After a little bit of explaining, Todd had no other choice but to believe Mord. He then asked Mord if he knew Vince, to which he answered no. Todd told him that Vince is a Vernars warrior who was trained from a young age and passed a strict test. And right now, Mord has beaten him in just one attack. With that, Todd had given our MC a total of 200 points for this test, even if the maximum was just over 100. Given that Mord was clearly strong and skilled, Todd was having a hard time determining which level he should be. He explained that the Archduke Vernars family has a 3-level curriculum for warriors. If one fulfills the conditions at each level, he advances to the next. If he completes the last level, he is then qualified to be an official warrior. Todd reminded Mord that every level was difficult and a lot of warriors were finding themselves stuck. Mord asked to be put in the first level, to which Todd was dumbfounded. He rationalized his request by expressing his desire to learn combat techniques. Our MC also found out that the other 2 levels would not teach him any of the basics. This made his decision final. Todd did not expect this and assumed that Mord would want to take the test to become an official warrior right away. He then agreed to put Todd in the first level and dismissed him. Todd also added that he will ask someone to pick Mord tomorrow to send him to the first level. T-Sung was back in his room, relieved that the test went smoothly. He wondered if Mord went through the same process, as the novel did not talk about how this guy became Archduke Vernar's hidden card. He thought it made sense since Mord was just an extra. All the novel included was that Mord was used as Archduke Vernar's human weapon. This character had a weak personality. He didn't even try to fight back from his bullies. Our MC then concluded that maybe Mord was also beaten up when he got to the first level of the training camp. T-Sung slowly came to an understanding of why he had to possess Mord. With his original identity as T-Sung, he had always fought against injustice. Meanwhile, Mord lived a life opposite his. He was determined to save the world from destruction. And in order to do that, he has to stop the novel's protagonist, Aiden. In this story, the one who could complete the world fragments, which contains the essence of the world, would become the supreme god, the magician who dominates the world. Aiden had completed the world fragments and became the being to dominate the world. The result was the destruction of the world. As a god, Aiden did not just kill his enemies. He also ended his friends. As the sun set, our MC was determined to stop Aiden with his plans. T-Sung resolved to completely live as Mord instead of T-Sung. The Archduke Vernar's family is the ruler of a nation called the Principality of Vernars. The Vernars castle, which is at the heart of the nation, was as luxurious as other nations' royal castles. Its training facilities for the warriors were situated on the outskirts of the castle, the outer castle's 3rd region. Mord was in a carriage that will bring them to the training facility. He noted that the training facility was bigger than most university campuses. He was then startled by a loud noise coming from the direction they were going. The man sitting beside him noticed his confusion and explained that the sound was probably from the 3rd level training grounds. Mord was surprised that this sort of sound came from a group of trainees. He figured that trainees must easily surpass a human's limits, given they're on their way to becoming Vernar's warriors. These warriors are said to be capable of merging the powers of multiple people into one. The carriage arrived at the outer castle's 3rd region. It was gray with massive walls and gates. Mord alighted the carriage and was welcomed by the first-level instructor named Hayes. Hayes assumed that Mord had done badly on the test, considering he is in the first level right now. Mord corrected him and said that he defeated Vince. Hayes was surprised by this and asked why he was there. Mord then replied that he was there to learn the basics. Hayes was still doubtful but continued to lead Mord to the training area. He then stated that people were in the middle of their training, so it would be great not to distract them. Mord assumed that although it was just the first level, participants must be strong since they were training to become Vernar's warriors. Hayes introduced the trainees. Mord got to the first level training grounds and was surprised that most if not all trainees were just kids. He suddenly regretted not having gone immediately to the 3rd level. Hayes asked Mord if he had never learned the mana combat technique. Mord mentioned that he did not, but he has mana. Hayes told him that that was a given since he's already gone through the new blood awakening. He then proceeded to teach Mord the process of mana, the detection of ether, creation of mana, and collection of it. Mord then asked if he didn't need to learn any combat skills. Hayes then confirmed if he could stay longer, for he could do his request. Mord then clarified it was not what he meant. Hayes knew that all he wanted was to teach him a few things, and that the 2nd level instructor could just fix it if things were terrible. Mord thanked him. In our MC's mind, learning the basics would be a good foundation to utilize his powers well. After a few minutes, Mord seemed to have mastered the active mana, and it didn't make sense to everybody. His fellow trainees gathered to watch him train, and even noted that his mana could be stronger than the instructor's. Mord was done and asked if that was all he had to do. He couldn't believe that that was it. Hayes, having witnessed that Mord was way too advanced, declared that he just graduated from the first level and moved him to the second level. Hayes then explained that the physical reinforcement lessons at the second level are split into two sublevels. The first is hardening the body to prevent any damage taken if one were to be hit by a carriage. The second is amplifying one's physical abilities so that one can transcend the limits that are reached when training with one's muscles. Physical reinforcement is a very difficult skill that so many trainees fail to achieve. But Mord did not even take more than half an hour to master it. His second instructor also promoted Mord up to the next stage. He explained how easy it was to reach the second level, but it would be different by the third. He then continued by saying that just like Mord, there would be guys that were part of the bloodline in the next level, so graduating from it would be a challenge. Also, the fact that our MC would be facing them without learning any battle skills. The instructor warned him that the third level is not easy and he will have to work hard. T-Sun already knew that the third level would be difficult, but he was excited to meet people with new blood power. It was the next day. In the third level training grounds, rumors of Mord passing the second level in 2 days have already spread. He was also rumored to be of the Vernar's bloodline, just like another third-level trainee called Fionn. The redhead trainee, Fionn, then remarked that Mord probably did not come to the third level right away so he could get the Archduke's attention. He had decided to show Mord that there were ranks within the Vernar's bloodline. Mord arrived at the third-level training grounds, hoping he had just skipped the last 2 levels. He was immediately confronted by Fionn, who introduced himself as Class 2's captain. Fionn mentioned that he was also of the Vernar's bloodline. Mord then introduced himself and said that he was supposed to be part of Class 2, although he does not know for how long. Fionn took offense at this, accusing Mord of thinking their training was a joke. Mord then poured more gas to the flame by saying he wouldn't have come to the place if he thought of it that way. Fionn was literally emitting flames out of annoyance. Our MC even asked him to calm down, as he was not in the mood. Mord, in a light-hearted manner, playfully remarked that he had no need to worry about wetting his pants simply because Fionn tried to intimidate him. Fionn was stunned. He emitted more flames and put emphasis on the fact that he was also in the Vernar's bloodline. Fionn then exclaimed he would kill Mord. Trainees that were watching started to feel sorry for Mord, for they knew their comrade's attitude. Fionn was aiming at Mord, saying that he will make him pay for blabbering. The attack emanated a loud noise and made the dust fly around the grounds. The trainees who were watching assumed that Mord had taken a hit and hoped that he would make it out alive. They were all shocked. One hand was trembling, as if the person was trying to stand up. Mord remained at his place and looked down at Fionn, saying that he was looking forward to seeing how strong he'd be. And as the dust cleared, it revealed Fionn was on the ground. As it turned out, he was nothing more than some village bully with a bloody nose. Fionn expressed an accusation that Mord's successful punch was merely a stroke of luck. Mord corrected him that it was not because of luck but because he was weak. Fionn was enraged and aimed again for Mord. With each punch he threw, Mord was able to dodge them easily. Fionn charged another attack, but it was nothing for Mord. He then used his skill, causing huge amounts of dust to cover the place. Mord was shocked after he realized Fionn was way too weak. While the red-headed Werner hit a wall and passed out, our MC then wondered about his strength. Considering he has not mastered the mana combat technique, then it would be safe to assume that Mord in the novel was more powerful than him. One trainee asked Fionn if he was okay, but the red-headed Werner pushed the trainee aside and declared the battle was not over yet. Mord didn't think it was a good idea, for Fionn already passed out earlier. The red-headed Werner was still too proud to admit that Mord was more powerful than him. Our MC then mocked him and stated that for someone who was training to become a warrior, letting his guard down shouldn't be an option. Fionn got even angrier, to the point he had awakened his power. Trainees surrounding the two got worried. One even suggested Mord to run for his life. It seemed like Fionn was summoning the new blood power. But our MC knew he was not controlling the new blood, but rather, it was his mana. While Fionn was summoning his power, an instructor entered the scene, and instead of stopping the fight, he decided to just let them be. for he wanted to test Fion's power himself. He then looked at Mord and realized he was the Vernar's kid that just arrived that day. In the instructor's mind, it wouldn't be a big deal to let one Vernar kid die. Fion casted a skill that left our MC shocked. Fion utilized an advanced skill that uses the body or a weapon as a vessel to create stronger energy form. This skill was called Body Impulse. Fion continued to attack using his power, but Mord was able to dodge it. It was an immense force that crushed the ground. Our MC knew it would have been bad for him if he got hit by it. Fion taunted him to stop running away from his attacks. As he struck one powerful punch, Mord followed suit by throwing a punch in response. Fion's nose started bleeding and cursed at him, and as they continued to fight, Mord was able to dodge all Fion's attacks. The red-headed Vernar was shocked, for Mord was not even using new blood power. The trainees were even more surprised that Fion couldn't land a single hit. One mentioned that it was the same for Mord, but the instructor disagreed. He was sure Mord hit Fion, for his impulse decreased. Our MC uttered that it was time to get more serious. Mord proceeded to throw a punch. He was able to hit Fion on his stomach. Fion was on the ground, and our MC apologized for hurting him. The red-headed Vernar struggled to get up. He then teased our MC for running around. Mord got irritated. Fion was glad that Mord fell for his mockery. With a swift motion, he directed his punch towards our MC, but Mord was just looking at him. And then an intense clash happened. Our MC caught Fion's fist and stated that impulse was no use if one was weaker than his opponent. He then told Fion that it was a good lesson for him. In Fion's mind, it was common sense for an impulse user to always win against a non-user. Our MC then threw a punch. With astonishing force, Mord's attack pierced through Fion's body. This red-headed guy realized that he started a fight with someone he could never win. The punch threw him flying to the wall. Mord was just looking at this poor thing, and the red-headed Vernar passed out. The instructor was surprised by the fight, questioning where a monster like Mord came from. He could not believe that an illegitimate child defeated Fion without even using impulse. He then noted that he had trained countless Vernars until now, but even a talented illegitimate child couldn't close the gap between themselves and a direct bloodline. Our MC asked the trainees if there was someone else that wanted to fight with him. The instructor ordered for Fion to be taken to the hospital. He thought to himself that the order of command will fall if he doesn't do anything about this. And in his mind, however excellent Mord might be, he was still a legitimate son with no support system. Hence, he resolved to tame him. Fion was injured badly from his fight with Mord. He had to stay in the medical center while he was in a coma. Mord, on the other hand, was put on probation for 4 days. Mord was scanning a tactic theory text, but he found it way too easy. Considering that T-Sung studied up to graduate school, the written test shouldn't be a problem. Mord was already getting bored from staying in the dorm all day. He then decided to just practice with his mana combat technique, when suddenly, Instructor Todd entered his room. He had heard about the trouble he caused in the 3rd level training ground. Todd then told him that the Archduke would like to see Mord. Our MC asked why the Archduke wanted to see him. Todd then responded that he would know once they arrived there. He then continued by saying that Mord should act civilized. In our MC's mind, the Archduke Vernar himself didn't even like all the etiquettes of aristocracy in the novel. On the way to the Archduke, Todd opened the topic of rumors spreading about Mord. Todd thought of him as a clever kid. He was sure others think the same way too. He asked Mord if his plan all this time was to get the Archduke's attention. Mord then replied that if he wanted the Archduke's attention, he would have just become a very powerful warrior. Todd told him that the Archduke received reports on what happened and took an interest in him. In our MC's mind, destroying a Vernars is something worthy of his attention. They were almost at the training grounds of the Archduke, and Todd did not forget to remind Mord to not be conspicuous. They reached the training ground and arrived to witness the Archduke training with a few other men. Mord took notice of the overwhelming aura of power of Archduke Vernars. He looked like some muscular giant compared to him. Mord continued to observe the Archduke's training. Multiple men tried to attack him all at once, as he stood inside a dome. One punch cracked the shield, and the Archduke immediately ordered his warriors to back off. He then gathered his energy. it turned into a bigger sphere. Archduke Vernar raised this force up in the air. Mord recognized the skill the Archduke used. It is an overpowered skill that absorbs both marginal and physical attacks, and turns it into a shockwave that one throws back at the opponent. Archduke hit a wall of the training ground. The skill was known as the God of Combat's Mirror. In Mord's observation, it was still incomplete, but he noticed how strong it already was. The Archduke acknowledged them after a while. Mord and Tog greeted and kneeled before him. The Archduke then told them to get up, as he didn't want to deal with etiquettes. The Archduke approached Mord and expressed that he had heard interesting things Mord has done at the training facility. Now that they were facing each other, Archduke Vernar's looked even bigger and more intimidating. The Archduke then asked him who his mother was, to which he answered Reina. His Grace then told Mord that he remembered Reina, and continued by saying that he seemed to take after her more than him. The Archduke heard that Mord won against Impulse with just body reinforcement. He wanted to see how strong Mord was, so he called on someone named Kessner. The Archduke asked him to spar with Mord. He then stated that Mord was his son, and that he wanted to see how strong he was. Kessner was one of the 10 men the Archduke was training with earlier. He then invited Mord into the sparring field, and even told him he could use a weapon if he wanted. But our MC responded that he didn't need one, as he never got to learn how to wield a weapon. He told Kessner he would settle with his fists. The warrior had his doubts. Kessner advanced at Mord right away, but our MC was able to dodge it. Mord noticed right away how powerful and different an Archduke's personnel would be, while Kessner noticed how Mord was able to dodge his attack without using any mana. Kessner kept attacking him. Mord then concluded that this warrior was in another dimension from the guys he fought until now. Our MC was brought to the ground. Kessner complimented his spirit, for he was not giving his all despite being cornered. He decided not to go easy on Mord anymore. Our MC realized Kessner was pulling up his mana, and guessed that he might also be of the Vernar's bloodline. Mord realized that he had never fought with everything he had got since coming there. Since Kessner is close to the Archduke, Mord decided he must be worth giving his all. He then gathered up his mana. The two were facing each other, both emitting powerful energy. The Archduke seemed to be impressed. Kessner saw Mord's mana. Thiessen then assumed that the Mord before probably never maximized all of his potential, since he grew up hearing people call him the child who killed his mater. He probably never had a chance to properly use his powers because of the guilt. Thiessen as Mord was determined to live up to his potential. The two stared intensely at each other. The Archduke's warrior even smirked. Kessner and Mord proceeded to battle with all their might despite the gap between their skills. He then told our MC that he would teach him a lesson. Mord blocked his attack, and Kessner recognized his strength, but he uttered that it was useless. Our mighty MC was thrown into the air. As he fell to the ground, he was sure that he was able to block the warrior's attack. Kessner then immediately went to Mord's direction. Mord was stunned as Kessner made him realize he has a lot to learn. A powerful blow landed squarely into our MC. The impact sent Mord hurtling backward, crashing into the wall. Kessner then stated that he had not started yet. He continued by saying Mord shouldn't disappoint him. Kessner challenged Mord to bring out the best he had. There was such a big gap between his and Mord's abilities, which made our MC wonder if he had to use his new blood power. He decided against it, since Kessner will definitely also use his. Kessner teased Mord, who seemed to be thinking too much. As our MC wiped his mouth because of blood, he then decided not to waste more time, and launched forward to Mord. Our MC prepared to defend himself from the attack. He immediately swung his fist, and blasted the ground to defend his space. Kessner was joyful about the progression, as it seemed like Mord was revealing more of his strength. Mord does not intend on showing him everything he was capable of, but it got too annoying for him to just keep taking hits. So he decided to at least get one attack in. Kessner even noticed how big Mord's movements were. He then brought up that his skills are still beginner level. Our MC blocked one of Kessner's attack. The warrior reminded him that his blocking was no use. In Mord's mind, he predicted Kessner would do that. He was then able to throw a punch that made Kessner move from where he was standing. The powerful Archduke warrior was stunned by the fact that Mord was able to use a double attack. Kessner realized that Mord stole his skill and blocked his attack on purpose. He couldn't believe that he made the double attack skill so quickly. Kessner started to gather his impulse as their fight started to get more interesting. He then suggested for Mord to give his all. Our MC was joyed to see Kessner using his energy, for he wanted to see his real powers. But the Archduke already put the battle to a stop. He then ordered Kessner to back off. The Archduke approached Mord and praised him for his skills despite only awakening his new blood recently. Then, the Archduke suddenly launched an impulse ball towards Mord, but Mord immediately defended himself. His body couldn't take the power initially and thought of using his new blood power. After a few seconds, he realized that he could do it. As he recalled the fight with Fionn, he was able to use his impulse for the first time even with a beginner-level body reinforcement. Mord gathered his impulse, for he planned to block the Archduke's attack. His Grace seemed satisfied with this. Todd, on the other hand, couldn't believe that he can already use impulse. Mord's whole body was lit up. T-Sun also realized that Mord's talents are beyond his imagination. He figured he can copy a skill just by observation. The Archduke was impressed with Mord, and in return, he asked if there was something he wanted as a reward. His Grace suggested money no one could ever dream of having. He even mentioned the idea of having a mentor to train him. But our MC already knew what he wanted. He needed to collect the world fragments before Aiden did to stop him from destroying the world. He then stated that he didn't need any of the things the Archduke mentioned. Mord finally told the Archduke that he wanted to challenge the god of combat's grave. There are places called dungeons in the world of magician who dominates the world. Like all dungeons in fantasy realms, they're dangerous places full of monsters. However, this world's dungeons are a bit different as they are symptoms of the other world's erosion. In other words, dungeons form in places where the world and others overlap, and abnormal things happen inside. Most dungeons are overlapped with the demon realm, and this world's monsters are mostly from dungeons. Although, the god of combat's grave, where the god of combat, Vernars, was said to have been created, has nothing to do with overlapping with another world. That is where the world of fragment is hidden. His Grace looked at Mord questionably. Our MC noticed his Grace's reaction and thought that maybe he asked too early. The Archduke wondered why Mord wanted to challenge the god of combat's grave. Mord replied that he heard that's where the traces of the god of combat, Vernars, are left behind, and he wanted to see the root of his bloodline himself. Kessner was watching this exchange and noted that Mord was more immature than he thought. The god of combat's grave is where the coming-of-age ceremony for the direct bloodlines is held. He thought that Mord's request seemed like a direct challenge to the direct bloodline, for an illegitimate son could not go into such a place. Kessner was about to express his disagreement, but the Archduke interrupted him right away. The Archduke mentioned that there have been several times when an outside bloodline went into the dungeon for the sake of an expedition, although not in his generation. He asked Kessner if he also wanted to go inside, but he couldn't answer. It was obvious he really wanted to come. Kessner has lived an inferior existence just because he was born illegitimate. Our MC was sure Kessner also wanted to taste the privilege of a direct bloodline. The Archduke expressed to Mord that it was still too early for him to go, and he cannot send someone unqualified there. His Grace will only give him a chance to challenge the god of combat's grave the day he becomes an official warrior. In our MC's mind, becoming a warrior would not be too hard of a task. He just needed to be faster than the novel's protagonist Aiden. Mord agreed with the Archduke's suggestion, looking more determined than ever. Todd and Mord left the Archduke's training ground. After the encounter with Mord, the Archduke asked Kessner what he thought of Mord as he fought him himself. Kessner replied that he seemed like he was hiding a lot and wasn't trying his best when fighting him. The Archduke voiced that he looked like he was trying his best when taking the impulse ball. He also noticed that he seemed to have learned the body impulse on the spot. Kessner brought up that he knew other guys who learn on the spot, but the most surprising thing about Mord was his mana. He then mentioned that Mord didn't know how to control his power yet, but the level of his mana was incredible. The Archduke said his mana is comparable to Erna's. He seemed to say more, but he did not continue. Kessner asked what he was about to say, but his Grace replied that it was nothing. In Archduke's mind, Mord's eyes were void of desire. in contrast to other bastard sons who were full of desire to get validation from him. He noticed how Mord takes after his mother, Reina, a lot. His Grace took note how interesting Mord was. In the level 3 training grounds, Mord arrived and started to observe the trainees. In his mind, he almost died of boredom after being put on probation for 4 days. He heard from other trainees that 5 illegitimate Vernar children will be chosen to challenge the god of combat's grave. And since there were Sir Kessner and Viscount Owen, there'll only be 3 spots left. Mord figured that he had to hurry and become a warder. The instructor for the 3rd level entered the grounds. He asked if everyone was already present, and one trainee responded that only Fionn was missing. The instructor then ordered them to prepare for their training. The 3rd level instructor's name was Daisley. Instructor Daisley approached Mord and informed him that he cannot participate in the lessons since he just started. He then told him to ask the other trainees to catch him up after the lesson. Mord was taken aback since the instructor was not going to teach him. He then asked him which trainee would be a good choice. Daisley called him thick-skinned for making demands from him after injuring Fionn. Mord retorted that he was already punished accordingly, and pointed out that it was clearly the captain's fault, to which the instructor yelled for him to stop talking back. Mord reasoned that he was not talking back, as it is a fair request. Daisley suddenly kicked Mord. Our MC was stunned and was moved back. Instructor Daisley then held his shirt and ordered him to run laps around the grounds until the training was over. Daisley also told him to listen to the lesson while running, for he would be punished if Mord couldn't answer any questions he would ask later on. Mord was enraged and unconsciously released mana. The instructor couldn't even believe that he was extruding mana. He took this as Mord looking down on his authority as an instructor. In a decisive act, Daisley swiftly delivered a punch directly to Mord. In our MC's mind, it was sure that the authority of the instructors was absolute in this place. Instructor Daisley declared that he would kick Mord out if he tried to resist. Mord contemplated the idea of approaching the situation by engaging in a confrontation with the Daisley, but decided against it as it might interfere with him becoming a warrior. He let it go and yielded to Daisley. The power-playing instructor then commanded him to start running. Mord got really annoyed, but since he had no other choice, he immediately started to run. The instructor looked at Mord intensely. In his mind, he would make him pay for disrespecting him. After that, Daisley seemed to hold a grudge and kept punishing Mord for every little thing. He was crazed with the authority he had. If he perceived even the slightest challenge to his authority, he would mercilessly administer both verbal and physical punishments as a means of asserting his dominance. To get away with it, he called every punishment training, so no one would be able to resist. This was how Daisley ruled over the training ground. A hand was shown trembling a lot. It was our MC trying to balance himself upside down with only his thumb. Mord was sure he was being punished for extruding his mana in front of the other trainees. He was then told to stay in the same position until the end of the training. In Mord's mind, he held everything in, for he was waiting to be taught with something of value. But it seemed like he had to get some real training in. Inside a cabin, Instructor Daisley seemed to be resting. He couldn't take his mind off Mord. Maybe he was in love. This individual, driven by a desire for power, struggled to let go of Mord's tendency to speak up and challenge him. He then realized that after all the punishment he put on Mord that would have destroyed anyone's body, our MC seemed to endure them until the end. The bitter instructor wondered how an illegitimate child like Mord without any real blood or training has become such a monster. He then swore to break the mighty legitimate Vernar child. In the 3rd level training grounds, Mord expressed his desire to take the test to become a warrior to Daisley. Both Daisley and his fellow trainees questioned his sanity. Our MC confidently answered he was serious. Daisley pointed out that he hasn't learned everything he needed to become a warrior, but Mord only put the blame on him for being neglectful of his duty. He even put emphasis on the fact that there was someone not really qualified to teach. This infuriated Daisley and said he wouldn't allow Mord to take the test. Mord then challenged Daisley into a God of Combat Spirit. The instructor was stunned and couldn't believe what he just heard. God of Combat Spirit refers to the sacred practice of duels. Like all those who respect power, they also had a barbaric tradition. He who is strong is right. Therefore, If one engages in God of Combat's spirit, the winner would be the one in the right. Instructor Daisley asked Mord how he knew about it, and our MC responded that it didn't matter. Mord stated that according to Vernar's law, as a trainee, he could request the said combat from an instructor. And his purpose was to prove that Daisley was not qualified to be his instructor. According to the legends, the God of Combat, Vernars, grew up unaware of his real identity. When he was younger, he was harassed by those drunk in power who claimed to be his instructor. Therefore, Vernars told his descendants, those who dictate over others without the ability to prove their qualifications deserve to die. For that reason, the Vernars law permits trainees to request God of Combat's spirit from their instructors. Mord even questioned this law. In his mind, the God of Combat himself was not in his right mind. Good thing though that it was beneficial for him right now. Daisley could not accept that Mord, who sees as a child, just challenged him to such a sacred ritual. He then grabbed Mord's shirt and told him that he was too inexperienced to even talk about it. But Mord reminded him that he does not have the right to deny a God of Combat's spirit. Instructor Daisley was trying to decide, while our MC waited. He then started to gather up his mana. Mord proceeded to challenge Daisley in front of all the other trainees. He even yelled for other people to hear. Our MC asked the instructor if he would accept or deny his request. He then threatened to go in public and announce what just happened, in case Daisley denied his request. The instructor himself couldn't believe how this trainee was acting. Mord then warned him that this would be his last chance, as he gathered more mana. Our MC then stated that he no longer wants to waste more time with this old man. The instructor started coughing as he inhaled some of the energy Mord emitted. Daisley was clearly threatened by Mord, but he cannot back off. For him, Mord is still just a kid, not even an official warrior. With that, he accepted Mord's request. Mord declared that the duel will start in an hour at the training grounds. But Mord immediately disagreed, for the challenger has the right to choose the time and place, and he reiterated that he didn't want to waste more time with him. Our MC then walked away from Daisley. Daisley wondered where this psycho came from. Kessner was able to hear Mord challenging Daisley to a God of Combat spirit. He was amused and wanted to witness the duel himself, so he called on a servant to arrange for him to go to the third-level training grounds. Back in the training grounds, Mord was already bored waiting for the combat to start. Some people even noticed how younger-looking he was. Daisley was clad in complete armor while Mord was still in his training suit. Our MC mocked Daisley for not running away. Daisley claimed that he will make Mord regret his arrogance. They were now facing each other. Kessner arrived at the grounds, which surprised all of them. Daisley was even more dumbfounded when he realized Mord knew Kessner. He assumed that must be why Mord was so arrogant that he had Kessner to fall back on. Kessner then asked Mord what he was thinking about challenging an instructor. Mord replied that he had no choice, as the instructor neglected his duties and seemed like his head was full of rotten thoughts. Kessner found it entertaining. He also reminded Mord to not underestimate Daisley despite being retired. Our MC thanked him for his concern, but he was sure of his win. Daisley was furious with all the disrespect. They were still waiting for another instructor as a witness, and when Kessner found out, he asked if he could take over the role of being the witness. News of Kessner being the witness immediately spread around the training grounds. This made people even more curious to know who Mord really was. Daisley could not believe that Kessner volunteered to be the witness. Kessner then asked him if he thought he was not qualified for it. Daisley put it down to the fact that he was a busy guy. Kessner took offense at Daisley calling him a guy, and asked him if he was talking down on him right now. Kessner then expressed that they are not equal just because he had him as an instructor in the past. Daisley was humiliated and apologized to him right away. Mord announced that it was already time to start. Kessner told him to better not make him regret coming all the way there. Mord and Daisley faced each other. Our MC asked if they could begin already. Daisley then pointed out that he couldn't simply use body reinforcement just like what he did with Fionn. The old man scoffs at him for not preparing enough for the duel, as he brought out his sword. The instructor wanted to see if Mord could block his sword impulse too. Mord replied that Daisley was definitely mistaken. He uttered if he really thought Mord would give his all in a fight against the trainee. Mord then geared to use body impulse, which got Daisley surprised that he already knew. Our MC launched his first attack, and the instructor immediately prepared himself for defense. The two met with each other's offenses. Mord then immediately swung his fist and Daisley was stunned. Our mighty MC pierced through Daisley's attack and sent him flying. The old man couldn't believe it himself. Just a few seconds after, Mord was already in Daisley's location. He then struck him, but Instructor Daisley was able to use his shield. The old man admitted how fitting Mord was to be a warrior, but he knew it wasn't enough to beat him. Daisley attacked back and voiced out that Mord may be strong, but experience was far more important. Daisley continued to strike Mord, while our MC seemed to struggle by the minute. The mighty Mord was grazed on his face. Instructor Daisley pointed out the fact that he already survived countless battlefields and near-death situations. He then mocked Mord's courage to request a god of combat spirit with him as the opponent. Daisley put emphasis on the fact that he was not someone Mord could look down on. Mord dodged his attack and jumped into the air. And as he landed on the ground, he admitted to himself that the instructor was right about the fact that he lacks experience. On the sidelines, Kessner continued to witness the duel. He noted that even though Mord was talented, his combat skills were still beginner level, and that experience was something that cannot be ignored. In his mind, if Mord loses, he would have to leave. He was certain Daisley would make sure of it. He then wondered what Mord would do now. Daisley taunted Mord, thinking he got the better of the kid. Mord then acknowledged the old instructor's skills aren't bad. His arrogance made Daisley bristle. The two continued to throw insults at each other. As Mord geared up to use another skill, Daisley was confused at the energy the kid was emanating, until he realized that he was using the new blood and block. Mord elegantly transformed himself, having his eyes and hair turn into silver. Our MC then opened his eyes. Daisley stated that what Mord did was impossible, and as Mord walked closer to Daisley, he ominously relayed that it was his first time fighting like this, so he wouldn't know how to hold back. Our MC then uttered that Daisley could just resent him if he ended up killing the old man. In the Verna's bloodline, after going through divine blood awakening at the age of 15, they are able to use the divine blood powers, although most of them stop at using the powers to increase their mana pool. While that allows them to gain incredible power, if someone were able to control divine blood in its entirety, they would gain immense power comparable to none. They couldn't believe that Mord, a 15-year-old, could already use divine blood powers. Even Kessner was stunned. He thought to himself that even he who was considered to be the most talented amongst the children took 4 years to awaken his divine powers, and yet Mord has done it with only 8 days of training. Daisley, too, couldn't believe it. By looking at Mord's silver eyes, he was certain that he had awakened his divine blood powers. He thought this was impossible. Mord informed Daisley that he will only be losing his pride if he quit now. The kid asked him if he still wanted to continue. The instructor was still delusional and confident that he wouldn't lose to a beginner. Mord swiftly approached him, reminding him that he was the one that declined his offer. Daisley exclaimed that the kid's attack will have no effect. The instructor couldn't brace Mord's attack and was sent flying. He wondered if this was the power of the divine blood. Mord asked him if his attack was too strong, as he was just testing it out and still can't figure it out. Daisley still couldn't admit that he was losing to a 15-year-old. He can no longer use his left shoulder, but he thought he would lose everything if he were to be defeated there. He brought out his sword with the intent of eliminating Mord. Mord, in the middle of the attack, asked him how long he was going to protect his weak pride. But before they could strike each other, this old man was able to increase his speed and outwit our MC. Daisley was able to break through the attack with sword impulse. This was intended to remind Mord that no matter how strong the kid is, the instructor was still above him in terms of battle technique. Kessner witnessed this and noted that Daisley deserves praise for that. But then, Daisley was shocked by what he saw. As for the Vernar's family's strongest weapon in defense is their body, a sword impulse would be a mere tickle for someone like Mord. Mord, completely unfazed, called out that Daisley has no right to be an instructor. Daisley was frustrated that the sword impulse he trained for decades was nothing against Mord. He found it unbelievable. He kept on swinging his sword at Mord, but the kid did not budge. Mord was disappointed. He told Daisley that the instructor still acted all high and mighty despite being this weak. Daisley was infuriated and asked our MC who he thinks he was talking to him like that. Mord caught Daisley's sword with his bare hand. He explained to the instructor that being of the bloodline of the god of combat, they are able to fight with their bare hands as no weapon is stronger than their bodies. He asked Daisley if really thought his attack would damage him. Daisley screamed in pain as Mord overwhelmed him with his powers. He finally surrendered. Before Mord, he fell to his knees. The kid told the instructor that he will let him live if he accepts defeat, and if he doesn't, Mord will kill him. Daisley thought that he was never able to face off against the kid. He then finally accepted his defeat. The crowd cheered but also found the events unbelievable. Kessner, impressed with the kid, wondered how much stronger he'll manage to grow. He commended the kid for the great battle. In another castle, Mord's name was being called out. The person, wearing a black cloak with a hood up, expressed that the kid was amazing after hearing about all he's done. The person turned out to be a woman with long silver hair. She revealed to never expected to see a monster like Mord. The woman was Erna Vernars, the seventh traditional bloodline of Vernars. Overlooking the castle, she guessed that something interesting might happen. The next day at the castle of Archduke Vernars, Archduke Vernars was seated on the throne while Mord looked up at him from below the steps. The Archduke told him that it seems like he was already an official warrior and heard that he easily passed the god of combat's spirit. Mord confirmed this and stated that he was there to collect his reward. The Archduke noted his guts and asked if he requested the god of combat's spirit just so he could become a warrior. The kid replied that he just couldn't watch the instructor give up on his duties. While going down the steps, the Archduke mentioned that the strong ones are those who are right. That was why he had no problem with Mord's actions. The Archduke thought the kid hid his strengths, and he then demanded to know why. Mord explained that he was just being careful since that was the first time he used it. The Archduke could tell it was a lie, but he let it go. He then asked Mord if his wish of challenging the god of combat's grave was still true, to which the kid answered yes. The Archduke's assistant then interrupted to ask the Lord to rethink his decision. He expressed that people would complain if the Archduke allowed Mord to challenge it before being officially announced as a warrior. The Archduke was enraged by the assistant as he questioned his decision. The assistant immediately retreated and asked for forgiveness. The Archduke iterated that a promise is a promise. He allowed Mord to challenge the god of combat's grave despite not knowing his true intent. Mord knelt on one knee and thanked the Lord. Mord smirked and thought that he finally had the chance to collect his first world affirmment. Kessner and Mord stood before the entrance to the god of combat's grave. Kessner informed him that only one person can enter at a time and that unless the person dies, no one else may enter. Mord thought that it was a lot bigger than he expected. Kessner expressed his disbelief that the kid would get to challenge it first. Mord replied that he too didn't expect it. The Viscount then told him to be more psyched as this was due to his efforts. He advised the kid to just come back alive. Mord thanked Kessner as he walked towards the entrance. Mord felt an odd energy just by standing in front of the entrance. The god of combat, Vernars, has never faced death. He fulfilled his destiny as a human and only left our world to become a god in the heavens. Mord pushed the gates of the god of combat's grave. The gates opened to a blinding light. Mord walked through the light. In his mind, 7 years from now, Aiden will manage to find a world of firmament inside. Mord entered the god of combat's grave. He thought the world of firmament should still exist there at this point in time. The gates closed after him. Mord was now inside god of combat's grave. He was surprised that it was different from the grave that was described in MWDW. There are 6 different layouts, but only one of the 6 was revealed in MWDW. He knew that each layout will have a seal. He needed to find that. He thought the seal was supposed to be a stone statue that represents the life of the god of combat. A creature seemed to observe Mord as he roamed the place. Mord noticed that the place looked unrealistic. It looked like it was only finished halfway. He then noticed something in the corner of his eye. A creature known as a hellhound advanced toward him. It had red eyes and fire emanated from its mouth. Turned out there were two of them. They growled at Mord, who was hoping he wouldn't have to face too many monsters. The hellhounds jumped to attack Mord, but he was able to defeat them easily. Mord walked away from the defeated creatures, noting that they just tired him out for no reason. Mord stood before something and it looked like he found a seal. The statue was of the god of combat defeating Etin during his youth. He wondered why they used it as a seal. Our MC then gathered his energy to prepare for something. Mord jumped toward the seal. He found a statue of the god of combat when he was only 10 years old and the god looked huge. Mord used his divine blood, transforming into his silver eyes and hair. Strings of power emanate from and around him. He walked towards the statue of the god. He let his blood drop on the statue. He thought it would have been hard to find it if he didn't have a clue about what he was supposed to do. The kid wondered who would have thought to drop blood onto the statue of the god of combat after awakening their divine blood. Our MC then got back down after doing the ritual. He thought he should just be grateful to be the first to claim it. He then left the statue to find the others. Unexpectedly, the head of the statue of the god of combat moved, seemingly looking at Mord walking away. It also started to have cracks, giant snakes, wolves, and an army of the dead. Mord had to beat a number of monsters. He was sure he had moved far enough for another seal. He noticed that the monsters kept appearing out of nowhere. He had no way to avoid them as the alleyway was small. He was face to face with a giant snake, thinking the trail for the god of combat would be straightforward. He then punched the snake with immense power. He figured he just needed to kill the enemy. Another flock of monsters appeared flying in the sky. They looked like ravens with 3 red eyes. Mord was relieved that at least he doesn't have to face them if he was on the ground. Since the moment he entered this grave, he already managed to find 5 of the seals. He noted that it was not far until he finally gained the world of ferment. The further Mord went in, the more mana he sensed. Due to awakening his divine blood 5 times, he doesn't have much mana left. He stopped in his tracks. He looked up, seemingly intimidated. He had arrived at the 6th seal. It was of a dragon with horns on its head. He noted that the statue was bigger and that climbing would be a hassle. A loud stomping noise surprised Mord. He was faced with a giant ogre. Ogres are monsters that are dense in mana and have bodies on par with those with physical reinforcement level 1. The ogre grunted at the unfamiliar kid. It then smashed its giant fist toward where Mord was, breaking the cement. Luckily, Mord was able to evade the ogre's fist. He thought this one was not an ordinary ogre. Normally they are about 4 meters in size, but this one looked taller than 5 meters. The ogre aimed at our MC again. The kid managed to escape a split second before the ogre's fist connected to the ground. Mord then retaliated by striking the ogre in its face. He continued bombarding this creature with his attack. This was barely enough to push back the ogre. It then counterattacked, and it was able to catch our MC, surrounding its hand around him. He then threw the key to the ground. Mord connected to the ground with immense force. He guessed he wouldn't be able to defeat it with just impulse. Once again, the ogre stomped towards him. It was aiming for another hit. Its giant fist smashed the wall greatly. It then smirked because it was sure that his attack smashed and killed the kid. At the same time, Mord awakened his divine blood. The force of this awakening was enough to send the ogre flying. Mord, now transformed, expressed that he would have died if he was a second late. The ogre rose and growled at the kid. Mord, on the other hand, was in the air aiming his power at the ogre. He hit the ogre with his fist. The kid didn't think he would have to awaken his divine blood. Now standing on the defeated orc, he reflected that he had been conceited, thinking he would be able to defeat it without his divine blood powers. Mord got off from where he was standing. He then proceeded on jumping towards the top of this dragon statue while realizing that battle knowledge and education make a big difference. He resolved to start over from the beginner once he was out of there. He was now faced with the last statue of the god of combat. He noticed something off about its height. He pondered why this Archduke Vernars was smaller, but he didn't dwell on it. He let his blood drop on the statue of the god, thinking the world of ferment is finally his. But after a few seconds, nothing happened. Mord was still there standing before the statue. He wondered if he did something wrong. According to the MDWD, he should have obtained the world of fragment by now. He walked away from the statue to go back to each of the statues, but he halted as he unexpectedly heard the voice of the god. The god's voice told him that he was hot-tempered, which was expected from being his descendant. Mord looked back, greatly shocked at what he was seeing. It was the god of combat himself telling him that it would be sad if he just left like that. The statue was alive. The reason Mord entered the god of combat's grave was that Aiden had obtained a world of fragment inside it. Thus, there's no way he would be aware of these events unless it was written in MDWD. The statue of the god of combat seemed to have transformed into a living being. He was trying to talk to Mord. Mord was wary and thought, if this is a hidden trial. He asked who the man was, but the man just found him funny and inquired about the kid's age. Mord awakened his divine blood and asked who he was again. The man was impressed, but an unexpected punch landed onto the old man. But the man took the hit unfazed. He then referred to Mord as his descendant and that he was rushing too much. The man then sent the kid flying. Mord hit the wall and looked hurt. The man was then aiming for another hit, exclaiming that he'll need to give the kid a proper greeting. He punched at Mord with immense power. The impact of this attack could be seen throughout the area. The surroundings were destroyed. Mord fell down on his one knee. He wondered whether he was seeing an illusion. He was sure it was a stone statue from a while ago. The man acknowledged him again, asking if the kid didn't really know who he was. Mord pointed out that he was aware he was the stone statue of the god of combat, Vernars. The man told him he wasn't wrong. He was what the god of combat, Vernars, left behind. His shadow as a human. Within MWDW, the god of combat's grave was known to have the remnants of his human self. So, this would be the grave most suited to his human form, not his godly form. However, in MWDW, it was recorded that the stone statues of his life achievement existed. Mord wondered if that meant his remnants were stone statues that had been imbued with his will. The god noticed that Mord looked doubtful. He decided to give our MC some proof to show him that it was real. The god also made fun of the kid, saying it looked like he was a lot weaker than he thought. Mord was annoyed and ready to fight him. The god was delighted to see him fighting back. He then aimed to hit Mord, but the kid managed to dodge. The god was a bit surprised at this. Mord created an impulse ball to attack the god. The god, still unfazed, told him he didn't expect the kid to use a trick like that. He then destroyed the impulse ball. This created a huge explosion along the area. Turns out, this was just intended to hide Mord's presence. But the old man was quick to realize that it was just a decoy. It annoyed him so much and proceeded to take Mord. He sent him flying, pointing out that only a weak and frail food would use a trick like that. He jumped upwards as well, and followed it up with attacks while they were still in the air. He exclaimed that he loves to defeat people with his bare hands. On the other hand, Mord wondered if this was a dream, as he was unable to defeat him even with the power of the divine blood. He found it insane for a stone statue to be that powerful. Punches were now coming in all directions, and our MC was not even able to react to any of these. The god looked down at the defeated kid, seemingly delighted. He then kicked him towards the wall for good measure. To Mord, that was now tired and sitting down with his back on the wall, the god asked if that was all he's got. The god expressed his disappointment. He pointed out that if this were a real battle, things would have ended him dying. Mord stood up ready to give another try, but he suddenly went back to his true form, losing his divine blood state. The god was surprised that was all it took to kill his divine blood state. He wondered if all his descendants were as weak as him. The god decided to stop attacking him and asked once again if he believed who he is now. Mord asked in return if he really was the god of combat, Vernars' shadow. The god told him to just treat him as Vernars. He told the kid that he's seen plenty of people try to face the dungeon, but Mord was the first one to awaken him. The god then asked him how long it's been since he was awakened. The kid replied that it was 500 years, which the god was stunned at. He couldn't believe it was that long, considering it wasn't that difficult of a riddle to solve. Mord then explained that it was likely since after the god went to the heavens, his two sons had a conflict about being the successor, and that the loser took a few artifacts, one of which had the secrets to this place. Mord also knew from MWDW that someone will find those artifacts and that person will become Aiden's aide. But he didn't tell the god. The god was surprised to know about this revelation. He just confirmed that his descendants really have his temperament. The god looked back at Mord, seemingly regretful that he had shown this side of him to the kid. He then faced Mord, still referring to him as his descendant, if he knew what it meant to awaken him. Mord answered him that he was not. Vernars asked Mord if he knew what it meant to awaken him. The kid answered that he was not. The god, shocked, asked if he was serious and why he spilled blood onto the stone if he didn't know. Mord told him he did it to obtain the world affirmament. He thought Aiden from MWDW obtained the affirmament there, but the god of combat didn't appear. The god confirmed that he would obtain it indeed. Mord wondered if the god of combat can only be awakened when he is offered blood from his own bloodline. Vernars told Mord the meaning of the kid waking him up, and the reason why he left behind the shadow was to teach him divine blood embodiment. Mord wondered if he was going to teach him how to use the divine blood power. The kid then asked the god why when he could just impart his teachings to future generations. The god explained that he wasn't sure if all generations will reach the stage of being able to teach the subsequent generations. He further explained that the talent of using divine blood is proportional to one's concentration of blood, meaning the later generations will find it difficult to properly use the divine blood power. Through learning, one can develop it to a certain extent. The issue is if there's someone who's able to teach that. That's why the god of combat's grave was made. Vernars expressed that it is a training ground for descendants and a mode of teaching. Mord thought that even if he could unleash divine blood, he cannot for long. That's why he will need a lot of training. Mord agreed to the training and asked the god how he was going to teach him. The god smirked and delightedly told him that the way was to fight over and over and over again. The kid was in disbelief. The god wondered if people have been spoon-fed nowadays. The kid then whined, pointing out that he will die before he learns how to do it, given that his ribs broke just earlier. Vernars told him his ribs don't even hurt anymore, which Mord realized was actually true. The god explained that in this place, both injuries and mana regenerate immediately. This old man also added that for this training, he will not be his opponent. Our MC then wondered and asked who will be the person that will train him. A few seconds after saying that statement, the surrounding walls in that place were shattered. At that moment, another Vernars entered flashily. This was like a superhero entrance. This guy then showed his grinning face towards Mord. He is the 10-year-old god of combat Vernars, Mord thought. He noticed that his hair wasn't silver, and it seems like he still couldn't use divine blood. The god of combat who was able to embody the divine blood power had light gray eyes and silver hair. The grown Vernars explained that the 10-year-old was the best suited to fight Mord. The 10-year-old then remarked that the kid wouldn't be able to withstand one punch. The 10-year-old kept on provoking Mord, pushing him to just run away. Mord also noted how this guy has an overwhelming physique, but he knew that he still had the advantage in terms of strength. Mord used his divine awakening and told his opponent to use his as well. This guy just laughed as he heard about the term divine blood awakening. He then told our MC that if 10 would use this power, Mord would surely die. Mord proceeded to attack 10. In a swift moment, he was already in front of him, but it turned out 10 wasn't bluffing. The grown Vernars and 10 looked at Mord lying face down. They were in disbelief at how weak he was. 10 pointed out that he must not have much experience fighting, and the grown Vernars stated that they need to teach him how to fight. Vernars asked Mord why doesn't know how to fight when he's already unleashed his divine blood. The kid replied that he never learned how to. Vernars found this strange. Mord told him about what happened to him in the present world. The god expressed his disappointment and dislike about the way things have gone. He decided to help Mord go against the 10-year-old god, reaching his hand out to the kid. Mord was elated about the one-on-one lesson with the world's strongest. The kid grabbed the god's helping hand. The god told him that he keeps getting beaten up by the same pattern of attack. The two now were facing the 10-year-old. Vernars told him to use 10's arrogance to break the pattern. At round 11, the god explained that his attacks are front-on and have no tempo control. Ten knew that and used his carelessness against him. At round 74, the god told him to change the trajectory of his punch. Ten was able to dodge this attempt again, but Mord noted that he grazed him. At round 272, the god advised him to make an opening. At this point, Mord saw how Ten moved and how he was going to counter. He finally was able to take a hit at the 10-year-old. Vernars was pleased, noting that the kid was good at putting whatever he earned into action. Mord was proud that he landed a punch. The previous attack from Mord was really powerful. The 10-year-old Vernars was hurt, blood coming out of his nose. He saw blood dripping on the cement. The young god had never been hit by anyone before and was in disbelief to see his blood. He assumed Mord had gotten used to it already. This also explains why his attitude changed. The kid looked uneasy. The 10-year-old created an impulse ball signaling that he won't be going easy on the kid anymore. This 10-year-old Vernars sent the impulse ball towards our MC, but he was still able to block it. But he was getting pushed back. He thought his body would be shredded to pieces if it went on. Mord looked at the old Vernars hoping he would stop the 10-year-old, but this old man was just watching them. Ten caught Mord looking away. He used that opportunity to take a hit at the kid. Mord was sent flying. The kid groaned from the pain, while the 10-year-old was clearly satisfied. Ten was swiftly approaching Mord with his fist ready to take another punch. He wasted no time bombarding our MC with continuous hits. He then threw an uppercut sending Mord upwards. The 10-year-old Vernars then followed it up with a kick and it sent Mord to the ground. Our MC was now struggling. He could not use his divine blood or even move a single finger. He then noticed something was moving. The head of the dragon statue which the young god had thrown was falling and going to crush him. The statue crashed to the ground, destroying the cement. The 10-year-old, clearly having fun, wondered if Mord was still alive. After a while, a hand was raised. It was from Mord. He couldn't believe that he was still alive, but the statue fell on his lower body. He looked worried as he couldn't move his legs. Ten went down from the statue he was sitting on, surging to where Mord was. Mord couldn't awaken his divine blood with his mana completely drained. He needed 8 seconds to regain enough mana. Trying to bid more time, he slyly asked the young god if the Vernars' bloodline had soft eyes like other people's. Something then flew towards Ten's direction. Our MC found a way to stop him using a tiny stone. The young god was pained because his eyes were hit by a stone. This made his attack miss. This cheap trick made this young god furious and he finally used his divine blood. He was aiming for another punch at Mord when the kid finally regained enough mana to awaken his divine blood. Mord was able to escape the young god's attack. He then proceeded to attack him and appeared from behind. Ten turned around to Mord aiming a hit at him. But our MC was quick enough and landed a hit. He was proud to get a strike in, but the young god did not even budge. He asked the kid if he really thought the punch could crack his skull. He then grabbed Mord by the neck and was ready to attack him with an impulse on his other hand. Mord looked terrified, wondering if that was too much for him. The grown Vernars suddenly demanded the 10-year-old to stop. Mord was sent flying, but not by Ten's impulse. The old Vernars stopped the young god's attack himself. He reminded the 10-year-old that their role was to teach their descendants. He declared the training to be over. The 10-year-old did not want to stop, but the grown Vernars just looked at him grimly. The young god suddenly came to his senses and released his divine blood state. Having witnessed this, Mord figured that the 10-year-old must be scared of the older god of combat too. He was relieved that he was alive. Cracks were forming in their surroundings. The grown Vernars remarked that it was time for the dream to separate from reality. He told Mord that he was going to give him a reward. The god of combat brought up Mord's other bloodline. He mentioned that the kid had the blood of a greater god and his father, Arita's blood. The god then blessed him with the body of the god of combat as a reward. With this, he will be able to awaken that authority. Mord noted that the term, body of the god of combat, has never appeared in MDWD. These two then said their goodbyes to Mord, but the younger one was still annoyed. Mord called out the 10-year-old Vernars. He told him he didn't think anyone from the present generation could beat the young god. He then thanked him as he earned a lot from him. Ten replied for him not to state the obvious. He also reminded Mord to look for a couple more sites that the god of combat has left other than the grave. The world collapsed. Mord woke up. What he experienced inside the grave was somewhat like a dream. Then, he was shocked by what he saw. A huge blue crystal was in front of him. It was the world of fragment, a tool used by great ancient gods when creating the world. Aiden used these world fragments to gain immense power, eventually leading the world to an end. Mord collected the world of fragment. Since he took it first, Aiden won't be able to grow as strong as in the novel. He asked for his understanding as an extra like him stole his power. Mord was confident that this was all for real happy ending. Meanwhile, somewhere outside the palace, Erna was being called. She was lying on a tree branch when someone told her about Mord returning from the god of combat's grave. She already heard this news and now, she was making a plan. This will be about how she will approach Mord, and the first strategy was called the Nice Sister Plan. All children of the Archduke and children of all traditional bloodlines of the same generation were able to compete as successor candidates. Each successor candidate slowly increased their forces by gathering warriors of Vernars. Right now, there were 5 candidates in close contention for the position. The 7th child, Erna. The 6th child, Vidin. The 4th child, Huron. The 3rd child, Dren. And the Archduke, Aaron. Since Mord has cleared the grave of the god of combat, this had an immense effect on all of them. Tea was being poured into a cup. The person having the tea was sure all successors are going to be recruiting Mord on their side. It was the 6th child, Vidin. He admitted he couldn't let a talent like Mord fall into the wrong hands. In the castle of Archduke Vernars, Outer Castle 1st Region, the male servant told Mord that this is where he will be staying. He referred to Mord as Lord. The Outer Castle 1st Region is where the rich stay. Most ordinary warriors stay in the 2nd region. Mord wondered if they were treating him well since he was of Vernar's blood and had awakened his divine blood. They gave him space to train nearby. They even gave him 2 servants, male and female. Mord thought he was finally living the life of a noble. Someone came knocking on the door asking if Mord was inside. The female servant opened the door. 2 men who looked like intermediate warriors came in. They were there to deliver a message from the young master, Dren. One of the warriors proceeded to read the message. Its intent was to recruit Mord to serve as his warrior. One warrior remarked that Mord was lucky to receive an offer to be his sword. They were stunned when Mord asked who he was. Mord couldn't remember who the young master Dren was. The 2 warriors were enraged. They called Mord an ignorant fool. At that moment, another voice inquired if he knew of the young master, Vidin. All 3 looked up to see who just came in. The 2 warriors called the man, Waltz. They asked him what he was doing there. Mord assumed Waltz was also an intermediate knight. He noted that the guy looked like he had something more than Vernar's blood. Waltz was there to recruit Mord too. The first 2 warriors argued they came first. Waltz taunted them by saying they lacked strength and would rather do things in order. They were infuriated. Waltz told them he'd welcome any offer to defeat them. He then advised them to get lost and tell their master they had failed. The 2 exclaimed to Waltz that he would regret what he did. They then left. Having witnessed the exchange, Mord figured not all intermediate warriors are on the same level. Waltz turned to Mord. He formally introduced himself as Waltz. Mord called him Sir Waltz. He asked if calling him his senior would be more appropriate, but Waltz said Sir was fine and that the true ranking of a warrior is not about rage or rank. Mord assumed Waltz was there to recruit him to Vidin's side. He asked what was in it for him if he accepted his offer. Waltz expressed that he had brought a set of offers for Mord, but he will do whatever it takes to take Mord to his lord anyways, even if it meant beating him to a pulp. He said that Mord shouldn't be too excited because he defeated one old fool and asked him to get a grip on reality. Mord realized that Waltz's only intention was to take him by force. He thought that it was better since he'll see the effects of his training. Mord accepted Waltz's offer to fight. The 2 faced each other on the training grounds. Mord asked Waltz if he needed weapons as he doesn't seem like a bloodline of Vernars. Waltz replied he doesn't use things like swords as he has something much stronger. Walsh then showed him his impulse gauntlet. Walsh explained to Mord that the impulse gauntlet is an advanced skill beginner warriors like him could never imitate. He proceeded to tell him that because of this Mord had no chance of defeating him without using his divine blood. But then he was shocked at what he saw. Mord had successfully created his own impulse gauntlet. Walsh was taken aback. He found it impossible for Mord to learn it in just 4 days. Mord immediately attacked. He asked Walsh if he thought he would be the same after 4 days. Walsh noticed that Mord was also fast. He was having a hard time keeping up with the kid. Our MC then used his impulse gauntlet to attack Walsh, but he dodged it. The power of this punch could be seen on the cracks on the ground. He realized Mord was much stronger than what he heard. He wondered if it was possible to grow as strong in just 4 days, but he concluded that Mord must have been hiding his true strength. He underestimated him. At that moment, Mord's mana was amplifying. Mord informed him that this was just a warm-up. Walsh couldn't believe that Mord barely defeated Daisley with this much mana. He also thought it was impossible to grow that much mana even if he was a descendant of Vernars. He could only come up with one explanation. He confronted Mord on why he hid his true strength when fighting Daisley. Mord knew he would not believe him if he told him the truth. The 2 things that helped him grow his strength were the blessing of the body of the god of combat and the using the world of ferment as a mana source. Walsh realized Mord was not going to tell him. He admitted he underestimated the kid and decided to show him his real powers. Our MC was shocked as he saw Walsh's true power. This guy's body has started to transform into a different species. It also meant that this transformation confirmed Mord's theory that this guy's blood was also mixed with something else. In the novel, people who had the full moon curse appeared. They transformed when it was full moon, and due to going out of control, they attacked all the people they came across. Legacies who were able to overcome the curse used their power freely, a combination of beast and human. They were called lycanthropes. Walsh had gotten a lot bigger. His transformation was successful, but Mord knew that his mana was still above his opponent, so he started to attack. Our MC was able to land his impulse gauntlet, but as the dust settled, he saw that this was not effective at all. Walsh was able to block his attack without receiving any damage. Walsh stated that Mord's mana may be better than his, but his physique was a lot bigger and stronger. Walsh started his counterattack by repelling Mord's fist. This gave him an opportunity to land a clean hit. Our MC didn't expect this guy's speed. Walsh's punch was enough to send him flying to the opposite side. Our MC started to recover. He smiled as he received some damage from that attack. Mord noted that Walsh got stronger, but not to the point where he would need to use his divine blood. He was still above in terms of mana, so it balances out. Mord asked his opponent if they shall end it. Walsh smiled because he assumed that Mord was already admitting his defeat, but it was the opposite. Our MC was scared because he thought that if he would use his divine blood skill, he's not sure if Walsh would live. Walsh started to laugh because of Mord's attitude. He knew that Vernars were like this, but our MC was on a whole different level. Mord then clarified that what he meant by his statement was to finish the match in one go. At that moment, Mord decided to use the world of ferment. He was ready to go all out. The person who possesses the world of ferment is able to use it by drawing out their mana. Mord successfully drew out its power with the help of the training process that was stated in the novel. He can be blessed with the god of combat's body for 20 seconds. With this, our MC was confident that he would defeat Walsh with his new power. Walsh realized that the kid really was a monster as he increased his mana even more. This beast decided to go all out as well and started to send these red slashes. Mord just stood there calmly as these attacks were approaching him. Right before these hit him, he was able to gracefully dodge them. Walsh didn't expect the sudden increase of this kid's speed. Mord was already in front of him. Our MC quickly charged his fist with mana, and he was able to release his racing gun towards Walsh. The beast was sent flying. It also ended up destroying Mord's place. The other warriors were worried about Walsh's condition while Mord was worried about his house. They quickly checked up on him. The beast was lying face down, concerned about having to see his master. He recalled Vidin telling him that Mord would be a huge help for their position. Walsh was surprised as the young master asked for his strength. Mord, on the other hand, was worried about the maintenance of his house. He heard that the warriors that went to check up on Walsh called out that he was safe. This beast was safe and sound, but something was different. His body was filled with an ominous aura. It also seemed that this one was out of control. Our MC didn't expect this one to still have a trump card on his sleeve. Mord was already thinking about using his divine blood state to finish this fight. Someone then yelled for them to stop. All of a sudden, Walsh was hit by an unknown attack. This attack was so powerful that it made Walsh back to his human form. A woman with a bulky physique and blonde hair then appeared. The other warriors quickly paid their respect and called her Miss Erna. They asked why she had attacked Walsh as he was just carrying out Viden's command. Erna explained that Walsh would have died if they had continued. She revealed that Walsh hasn't mastered this second transformation yet, and it made him lose his mind. Erna said that if Walsh woke up, he would agree with her. She then asked them to take him to the recovery room. Erna turned to Mord. She revealed that she wanted to meet him even before. Mord noticed that they had a similar build, except her face was cute. Erna told Mord to call her older sister Erna. This introduction also had a weird aura around it. Mord looked disgusted and declined. After that incident, Erna was now back in her room. She was clearly embarrassed about what happened. Her assistant reminded her that he told her to stop with the friendly older sister plan. He explained that Mord was an illegitimate child who wouldn't like it if someone from the legitimate bloodline suddenly approached him and asked to be friendly. Erna, on the other hand, thought the kid would appreciate the gesture. Erna was surprised that Mord defeated Walsh without his divine blood. Her assistant was on the same boat as Walsh's skills are that of a high-ranking warrior. The news that Mord defeated Walsh had spread, and the competition to recruit Mord had become higher. The two were still strategizing on how to persuade Mord when someone interrupted them with urgent news. Erna asked what it was. The man exclaimed that Mord was announced to accompany Viscount Winsall on the obstruction mission. After some time, Mord looked at his house and was impressed with how quickly the hose was repaired. He didn't expect that Walsh would pay for the damages. Mord saw something inside. It was Sir Kessner. Kessner told Mord that it looks like he's been causing a scene ever since his return. He asked the kid if couldn't live a quiet life. Mord then replied that he had no choice, as everyone had been dying to get a piece of him. He asked the Viscount what he was there for. Kessner invited him to join him and his subordinates in a task. The task was to prevent demonification. Dungeons, as stated at the start, also exist in this world. But unlike normal dungeons, those places where demonification occurred were those with outbreaks of monsters. It is a purposeful act of demons trying to take over humanity. There are 3 stages. Stage 1 is when an unknown vortex appears. Stage 2 is when the vortex solidifies, making it impossible to enter. Stage 3 is when the nearby land gets corrupted and demons get more powerful. If not stopped by Stage 3, a dungeon break occurs. Both worlds will be connected and demonic beings will start entering the human world. Kessner informed Mord of the dangers and that plenty have died through these missions. That's why he won't force the kid to come if he declines. Mord thought that it would be worth taking on this risk. Given that he was getting tired of dealing with the offers, he figured accepting the offer might be the perfect opportunity. The kid finally accepted the offer. He asked whether he starts training in the afternoon, looking determined. In the training grounds, Kessner apologized for the last-minute decision and announced that the kid will be coming along for the mission. He introduced Mord as the kid who defeated Instructor Daisley and the intermediate warrior, Walsh. Mord looked over the warriors and assumed that since they were Kessner's men, they were at least advanced warriors. He was sure they were concerned about someone like him joining their ranks. He thought he just needed to prove himself. He was faced with a warrior that was about 180 cm tall and had an awesome build from training and experience. The kid was determined to take him on when the warrior grabbed his hand. The warrior turned out to be really jolly. Mord was surprised at the unusually friendly reception. He realized that they were all accepting of him. Kessner asked for their attention. Their leader reminded them to focus on working together for the next 10 days. In the meantime, he will be challenging the god of combat's grave. He asked Eriksson to take care of Mord. Eriksson, the friendly one, introduced himself and another warrior called Recap. They are both advanced warriors. Erickson explained that Mord's role will be to work with Riken and support Sir Kessner at the center of their formation. He asked them to get along. Mord wondered how he was supposed to get along with someone as emotionless as Riken. Erickson then started their training. 10 days later, Kessner was coming out from the god of combat's grave. The warriors congratulated him and asked if he would like to eat. He declined as he still has another mission to attend to. Kessner wondered if Mord had gotten used to things. Meanwhile, at the training grounds, a lot of powerful blows could be seen. Kessner arrived here and he was quite shocked at the progress they have accomplished. He noted that Mord was completely different from the god of combat's spirit. He couldn't believe that he managed to grow even stronger. Erickson noticed that the Viscount was back. Kessner asked about Mord's training. The warrior recounted that they focused on his basic abilities first and now are teaching him how to use physical reinforcement to nullify demons. Kessner asked his perspective on the kid. Erickson told him that the kid was quick on the uptake, but the more surprising thing is he was able to keep his divine blood awakened as long as Riken. The Viscount was surprised at this considering Riken had awakened his divine blood 12 years ago. They found the kid unbelievable. On the other hand, Mord was too focused on his training. He didn't even notice Kessner. This kid was having fun. He remembered when he was stuck in his hospital room doing nothing. He thought that at least this time, he had a clear goal for his life. Every time he learned something new, Mord could feel himself getting stronger. He felt like he could do anything now. After some time, they now have to move to the mission area. Kessner asked if they were worried about the mission, but Erickson told him of course not and that he was sure they would be ready for anything with Mord around. Kessner was worried about Mord being able to work with them within just a few days, but it looks like he was mature enough to know his role and adjust it as necessary. The Viscount asked Mord once again if he was sure he could return safely. Mord answered him with yes and that he was eager to start the mission. All 7 of them proceeded to start their journey. Kessner made sure they got plenty of chances to fight. The group of warriors arrived at a cliff. Kessner quickly noticed something with the dungeon. The second stage of demonification has already begun. More violent energy has enveloped the area. The warrior on watch greeted the Viscount. Kessner asked him what happened as the erosion day was earlier than expected, looking alarmed. The warrior replied that there seems to be another sign of demonification in the area. It was only a matter of time until the erosion. If 2 demonifications fuse together, the process of erosion gets faster, and the danger also increases. Erickson voiced out that they would have to try to wrap things up as soon as possible. The Viscount decided to forego their break and asked them to stay focused. They will enter at once and target the center immediately. This was officially the start of their mission. Before them is a grimly-looking tower. But Mord noted that it looked like a picture. He assumed that this huge tower-like structure was the center. They then heard the barks of hellhounds. These creatures have grouped up in large numbers. As soon as the hellhounds saw the group of Kessner, they started running towards them. Aside from the hellhounds, orcs also started to appear behind them. Kessner then gave them their tasks. Mord and Raquel will be using their divine blood state and perform a trap against the monsters. This signal gave all of them the permission to use their powers. Kessner, Mord, and Raquel led the charge and moved out. This group of warriors were really in sync. They immediately went and performed their roles. Each of them was strong enough to annihilate the monsters. They didn't have a hard time with this one. Some of them didn't even have the Vernar's blood, but they were powerful enough to be on par in terms of strength. While all of them were busy fighting, Kessner noticed something strange. The pace of the monsters coming at them was becoming fast. They figured the fusion of demonification started to occur. They needed to break through and deal with the core quickly. Kessner tasked Riquet and Mord to deal with the Cyclops as he dealt with Etten. Our MC was the first one to deal with the Cyclops. He started charging his fist with his mana. This guy charged towards these monsters without hesitation and overpowered them. Riquet observed that Mord was not scared at all despite his first time entering a demonification process. And since he got distracted, something appeared in front of him. He was surprised to see another giant red demon coming at him. This red demon started to condense its energy into a powerful attack. Zeke knew he was in trouble and he needed to set the trap quickly. Luckily, The giant red demon was hit by something. The one that conducted the attack was Mord. He came at the right time. These two then started attacking the demon. It even made the demon fall into its knees. Mord was also prepared to follow this up with another punch. He charged his fist with his impulse gauntlet skill and struck the demon. This was more than enough to seal the deal. Recap witnessed all of these. He then realized that Mord was a monster himself. Recap protected them from getting soaked from the blood of the Cyclops with his shield. Mord thanked him. Recap told him the Viscount is probably finished slaying and is on his way to the center already. As they searched for their leader, Recap saw something unusual. He found Kessner, but this guy was busy staring at something. Their Viscount was about to face 5 demons all by himself. Recap got himself distracted again, and then something happened. Mord fell down from the ground and was transported to another place. Our MC was then greeted by someone in front of him. A monster that was seated on the throne was talking to him. And this one has this huge amount of dark aura around him. Mord wondered what kind of creature was that. Behind the throne was a door that connects the demon world to theirs. Our MC thought that this might be the deepest part of the dungeon. The one that was in front of Mord was the boss monster of this dungeon. This one smiled because he thought that his prey was now being served. This demon was named Baron Ultas.